Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
The toxic drug supply is having a massive impact on our communities. It's ravaging our society.
The startling numbers. Homeless deaths spike in BC. Plus, it's coming. Get ready for a drop at the pump.
That's over 3 times the typical average for this time of year.
And it's the wildfire season that won't end. Why a change in weather could spark other problems.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. A CBC investigation is raising doubts about the ancestry claims of one of Canada's most prominent and successful Indigenous scholars and leaders. Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond has been a high-profile voice on behalf of Indigenous communities for decades. She's BC's former representative for children and youth. But as the CBC's Jeff Leo has learned, her claims to be a treaty Indian and to have Indigenous ancestors don't appear to be supported by documentation. Her story illustrates the complex and evolving debate around Indigenous identity in this country.
In 1999, Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond was already a well-established national figure when she sat down for an interview with Pamela Wallin.
Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond. She is the first Native judge in Saskatchewan.
Mary Ellen Turpel is also with us.
Turpel-Lafond leapt to national prominence earlier in that decade when she served as constitutional advisor to the Assembly of First Nations during the contentious Charlottetown Accord debates.
So it's going to be very difficult to say exactly what the Native vote is.
The Harvard and Cambridge-educated legal scholar has served as a law professor, a judge, and a children's advocate. And she's received honorary doctorates from 10 Canadian universities.
Over the past decade, she has been the voice of those who cannot be heard, particularly those from Aboriginal communities.
My father's a Cree Indian from Norway House, Manitoba.
What status does that give you?
I'm a treaty Indian.
93-year-old Joe Keeper, a Cree man from Norway House, knew Turpel-Lafond's father, Billy. They went to school together in the 1930s. Keeper said he'd never heard this claim that Billy was Cree.
He was not an Indian boy, he was a white boy. The first I've heard of Billy being Indian is when I've heard it from you.
Turpel-Lafond says her dad was raised by her grandparents, William and Eleanor Turpel, who were both of European ancestry. They moved to Norway House in the late 1920s when Billy's father was hired by Indian Affairs as the local doctor. He served the Indian Hospital and the Indian Residential School.
There was a Dr. Turpel at Norway House when I was just a boy. The Turpels were not Cree. They were white people.
Turpel-Lafond declined an interview with CBC, but in an email she insisted her father is Cree, though she wouldn't say who she thinks his biological parents were. She would only hint at family secrets. Now, CBC reached out to her sister, and she said she thinks that her dad was possibly adopted from a Cree family by her grandparents, or was the product of an affair between her grandpa and a Cree woman. So CBC went hunting for records on its own. It discovered this newspaper announcement, which says William and Eleanor Turpel are Billy's mom and dad. A baptismal record says the same thing.
In that normal way of doing things, as an historian, when you see all these records line up, it would be very hard for me as an historian to not conclude that the boy born in Victoria was, in fact, the son of William and Eleanor Turpel.
Turpel-Lafond also claims to be a treaty Indian, but CBC has found no evidence to support that claim, and she has declined to provide her status card or even say if she has one. Indigenous scholars and politicians say there's a growing problem in this country of non-Indigenous people taking away opportunities from First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people by improperly claiming Indigenous ancestry. Winona Wheeler says because Turpel-Lafond has had a high-profile career while claiming to be a treaty Indian, she owes the public some answers.
People have the right to know that, who you're related to. So why wouldn't you be forthcoming about that? If she can't identify her Indigenous lineage, who's to say it even exists?
Terpel Lafon says CBC's questions about her ancestry are offensive and are an invasion of her privacy. She points out that she's been accepted into her husband's First Nations community, the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation, here in Saskatchewan. And high-profile supporters of Terpel Lafon, both inside and outside of that community, say if she's been accepted by a First Nations community, that should be good enough for everyone. Jeff Leo, CBC News, Regina.
You can learn more about Mary Ellen Terpel Lafon's claims to be a Treaty Indian and how those claims don't appear to match the historical record on our website. Jeff Leo's in-depth report is titled Disputed History. It provides more context on how the debate around Indigenous identity in this country is complex and ever-changing. You can find it at cbc.ca/SASK. It's been an unusually long wildfire season with warm, dry weather across much of the province. Right now, if you can believe it, hundreds of wildfires are burning. Saurabh Sandhu has more on a wildfire season that refuses to end.
This is what October normally looks like.
We typically start to think of this as our season of storms.
But not this year. Instead, there has been little rain and record-breaking warm temperatures.
We've seen 53 fires over the past week. That's over 3 times the typical average for this time of year.
Right now, there are 206 wildfires burning across the province, with little sign that an end to the wildfire season is in sight. And the small amount of moisture we have seen has made little impact.
These fires, they're not spreading very quickly. They're just continuing to burn. So they're burning in these large fuels and duff layer, which really aren't affected by overnight dew and even a little bit of precipitation.
So where did the typical October showers go?
We've been under a very persistent weather pattern that's brought dry and warm conditions here, and that has steered the systems over the Pacific up to the north into the Gulf of Alaska towards the Yukon.
And the warm weather is expected to last a little longer.
There is starting to be a little bit of a hint that perhaps toward the latter part of next week and the end of October, we may see a shift in the pattern.
But experts warn that a sudden burst of cold weather could spell danger for next year's wildfire season.
If we have a snow and then a rain on it and it freezes on these large fuels, then that impacts next year's fire season because the large fuels are already dry,
potentially leading to an early start for next year's wildfire season, with large fuels just waiting to spark. Saurabh Sandhu, CBC News, Vancouver.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff is here. Yeah, Joe, obviously very odd October weather. Is there any sense of why this long, dry and warm stretch is happening?
Yeah, as we heard there from Environment and Climate Change Canada, it really is this very strong high pressure system, more reminiscent of the middle of summer. And that's what we've had basically since the end of July, now going on 3 months. As far as why that high pressure system has been so stubborn, I'm looking at the Pacific. Earlier this season, we had a very warm sea surface temperature anomaly. You may remember we call these the Pacific blob. This one a little farther out than the blobs we've seen in the past few years, but I have started to see some chatter that maybe very warm ocean temperatures are causing that high pressure to stay in place over BC. So we'll be looking to see those conversations in the next few months, because this really is an historic event. I wanted to show you the special weather statement for both the interior and the BC Peace region. We still have smoky skies because of the fires burning both sides of the border. And drought, obviously the other big part of the story. Level 5 now for the past couple of days for the west side of Vancouver Island and Metro Vancouver. And level 5 does mean that adverse impacts because of those drought conditions certain, and we really are seeing those. One more board I want to show you. These are the latest dates that the South Coast has hit 25 degrees. We've already broken that record across parts of the island, Nanaimo and Campbell River. And Anita, we may re-break those records as we head into the weekend.
Wow, that is incredible to see. Thanks, Johanna.
You're welcome.
Well, the sentencing for the Dutchman guilty in the sextortion of Port Coquitlam teen Amanda Todd continued today. Today's proceedings focused on how long Aidan Coban should continue to spend in jail. The Crown is asking for a 12-year sentence. The defense wants 6. Earlier this year, Coban was found guilty of sextorting and harassing Amanda Todd. Coban was extradited to Canada in 2020 to stand trial. He had been in custody in the Netherlands since 2014, serving an 11-year sentence for fraud and blackmail. And a key argument in the hearing is whether Coban should serve his sentences concurrently or consecutively. But ultimately, that decision will be up to a Dutch court, which will be tasked with determining how to convert his Canadian sentence once he is back home. 15-year-old Todd died by suicide just over 10 years ago after years of online abuse by Coban. Well, the number of homeless people dying in BC is skyrocketing. It jumped 75% in 2021 from the year before. Leanne Young reports the majority of the deaths are all tied to the toxic drug supply.
For the past 2 years, Upkar Singh Tatley has been hearing firsthand from Surrey's most vulnerable people.
Any of the resources that they would have subscribed to or utilized to get along in their day simply vanished.
Pandemic closures left people isolated, and a new report shows it may have proven deadly. The BC Coroner Service found 247 people who died last year were experiencing homelessness. The year prior, the number was 141, a 75% spike. The 10-year average is 120 deaths.
Behind every data point is a person who's left behind a family, loved one, friends who care deeply about them, and just that our thoughts are with everybody who's grieving the sudden and unexpected loss of a loved one this time.
The report found most of those who died, primarily men, were killed by the same thing, BC's toxic drug supply.
So about 3/4 of the deaths that were investigated over the time period that was reviewed were determined to be accidental. And of those accidental deaths, about 8 or 9 out of 10 were determined to be due to illicit drug toxicity.
For those trying to stay alive, Tatley says the poison drug supply is making life even harder.
Don't know if they're going to be safe from one day to the next. And ultimately, the impact that that's having is it's almost like a domino effect.
In Surrey, Tatley says there are added cultural pressures. It has the second most homeless deaths after Vancouver.
There are people who are at risk, are vulnerable, who come from different communities, who don't speak English necessarily, who have cultural needs that extend beyond what we're used to in a Western context.
He says what's needed to solve the crisis is complex but essential.
Whether it's housing, shelter needs, harm reduction supplies, clothing, food, all those things are essential components to ensure that we don't see the steep increases that we're seeing as reported by the BC coroner.
And most importantly, he says, political will from all 3 levels of government. Leanne Young, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, if you haven't filled up your gas tank yet and you're close to empty, you may want to wait. Prices are expected to drop considerably over the next 24 hours. Refinery closures in Alberta and in the U.S. sent prices soaring at the end of September, climbing as high as $2.41 last week. Those refineries are opening back up, and experts predict prices could fall by up to 30 cents.
Prices should come down significantly. And we have been in a very unusual situation because of these refinery outages that have driven up prices to levels we haven't seen. Usually the refinery margin in Vancouver is around 45 cents. And that refinery margin had shot up to over 100 cents a liter.
Though it's good news in the short term, he says that drivers should still expect volatility when it comes to prices at the pump as the international price of oil ebbs and flows. With BC's municipal elections just days away, concerns about crime, public safety, and mental health have been prominent in many campaigns across the province. Our John Hernandez is looking at the role of a local government and what it can do to tackle problems that many say are getting worse.
From property crimes to violent assaults, concerns over public safety have mounted in communities across BC since the last municipal election.
But we need help now, and we need the support now.
Among areas most impacted is Vancouver's Chinatown, where attacks and racist graffiti have rippled through the neighborhood.
You know, we're seeing a lot of businesses shut down. It's affecting our community. It's affecting the residents. The seniors are afraid to come out and take part in shopping and just like everyday activities.
A recent provincial report notes there's been an increase in unprovoked stranger attacks in urban areas like Vancouver and Victoria through the pandemic, while residents in cities like Penticton and Kamloops have expressed growing pains over vandalism and thefts. But overall, crime rates have actually declined in BC.
Crime, generally speaking, has trended down, right? That's just been the norm in our general kind of numbers. However, perceptions of crime is what candidates are often kind of banking on.
While prominent incidents like stranger attacks have captured the attention of both the public and candidates, experts say other significant concerns have flown under the radar.
The statistical reality is when we're talking about violent crime, the most prominent violent crime, especially the one that was came to the fore during the pandemic, is domestic assault. Which candidates are talking about that?
Not to mention the province is struggling through an increasingly deadly opioid crisis, which public health experts say is inextricably linked to issues of street crime. So far in 2022, overdose deaths are mounting at a record-breaking pace. Advocates say the collective trauma of this crisis is taking a destructive toll on the most vulnerable. When combined with unaffordability, a lack of housing, and a shortage in support services, many people become desperate.
We're seeing people pushed more and more to the margins, and survival seems increasingly bleak when you can't even rent a one-bedroom apartment.
So how can municipal governments keep communities safe while also helping the most vulnerable? Solutions vary, from calls for more policing to the need for housing and support services.
Right now, we would love to see more boots on the ground, not people driving around in their vehicles.
I'd love to see leadership that actually questions what public safety and public safety for whom. So what if we saw leaders actually invest in some of that infrastructure that I mentioned earlier, like housing, safe supply, crisis response, affordable rent.
And so you have a large concentration of people that have all these problems and need services to provide them. But you need to have those services for people before they get into this state, before the trauma.
Solutions that might not all be found within any single platform, but advocates and experts agree the road to a safe community is paved with teamwork, empathy, and collective will. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
And depending on where you live in BC, you can catch a free bus ride to the polls on Saturday. BC Transit has partnered up with communities outside of Metro Vancouver to make sure eligible residents and Handy Dart users have access. Some of the participating cities include Chilliwack, Fort St. John, Kelowna, and Whistler. On the island, Comox Valley, Nanaimo, and Victoria. To see if your community is included, the full list is available on the BC Transit website. Meanwhile, TransLink says it will not be offering free rides. Okay, so yesterday we talked about stink bugs. They're increasing in numbers here in BC. That smelly insect is basically in search of a warm place to shelter over the winter, but it's also a destructive pest when it comes to many important crops in BC. Today, on a follow-up, our Rafferty Baker is finding out that hope may be coming in the form of another bug, a wasp.
They sort of look majestic with their shield-shaped bodies and marmorated colors. But that doesn't mean you'll want them sneaking into your home.
Yes, we've had a few in our condo, these little black bugs that look like they have like an armor on them.
I saw it this morning around the little trees.
Yeah, we actually have had a number in our backyard, and we have a covered patio, and on the patio we've had some in our blankets that we have out there, which is a bit of a pain to get rid of. Yeah.
And have you tried squishing them?
No.
The foul odor is described as a pungent coriander-like stench, but it's due to their appetite for grapes, tree fruits, berries, vegetables, and other crops that make them a harmful threat in BC. They've already established themselves in the Lower Mainland, on Vancouver Island, and in the Kelowna area.
We do not want the brown marmorated stink bug spreading across BC. We've already got it in a couple locations. We want to keep it there.
They're great hitchhikers, so watch out if they're hopping a ride in or on your vehicle. You can kill the stink bugs. Experts recommend drowning them in soapy water. But any human intervention won't put much of a dent in stink bug populations without a major coordinated effort.
If I take action on my property with stink bugs and you don't take action on your property with stink bugs, we're totally ineffective. So it's a place where we all really have to work together. But at the same time, if they're in your house, you don't want to be releasing them back outside. So capture them, destroy them. Let's not add more back into the outdoors.
There is one thing giving researchers hope in the battle against the pests: a second invasive insect that likely followed the stink bugs from Asia, the Samurai Wasp. It lays its eggs inside the stink bug eggs, killing the embryo.
Concern is will that other insect that's attacking this one, which helps keep the population of the brown marmorated stink bug in control, will it attack anything else? And that's a concern. So it's good to keep the population numbers down on the stink bug, but we're hoping it doesn't have ripple effect on anything else.
Even if the samurai wasps are effective at keeping the stink bugs in check, it could take a few years before that new natural balance is set in BC. So in the meantime, keep a close eye out for any stink bugs trying to sneak into your home. Rafferty Baker, CBC News, Vancouver.
He's led the city of Abbotsford for 8 years, and that really came through in last year's devastating floods. But soon, Henry Braun is hanging up his mayoral hat. He's with us next. Thanks for watching our commercial-free live stream tonight. More than 2 weeks after Hurricane Fiona made landfall, life is slowly returning to normal in some Nova Scotia communities. Many residents are still without power, and as Colleen Jones reports, one community is lending a helping hand to those without electricity.
I'm driving with Town Councillor Kathy Hinton and the East End Community Association's President Deb Pryor. The phone keeps ringing with people needing help.
Still no power with a little baby.
Okay, no power. Did he have a mast that was broken on the house?
They've been driving around their East End district since it's been safe to do so. People stop them on the street or when they're just parked helping someone else. It seems everyone needs help.
One of my constituents just found out that she's not going to have power till Sunday. She's got a disabled son with MS, and that's next door. And that's next door. And you'll see the damage there when you go there.
I'll go check that out.
We are day 11.
This is Eva Friendo-Cumbo.
Since the town came to clear up the road, but Hydro was here a few times and changing the dates from basically Monday to Wednesday to Saturday. Now we are on Sunday.
The lines and trees came crashing down. Her neighbor behind her has power returned. This neighbor next door is sharing her power with her through this massive extension cord. Inside the house, it's a sea of cables and wires. Outside, the noise of the generator. Frustrated? You bet.
I was frustrated, angry, because we done our part, I think, as citizens, as much as we could. And we are stranded, financially we're stranded, and I'm in this situation of the hydro. When does it end? Very cold.
What Eva fears the most is the safety of her son, Alfred, who lives upstairs with his wife, Stephanie. He has multiple sclerosis, uses a cane to walk, or in this case, just lean up against the stove as he cooks. The tripping hazards are everywhere. When you have some balance issues, is that your biggest problem right now with your MS?
Yes, I mean, you can't really tell right now because I'm leaning against. But if I were to try to stand on my own, I would have troubles.
The talk of help from the federal and provincial government is all well and good, but they need help now.
Oh, you can apply for this or this, but it's not helping right now. I mean, we all will need it down the line, but actually what we need is to be connected at this point and see that we get our house in order, that we don't freeze to death. Supposed to be connected today, by the end of the day.
I turned my camera away thinking she's finished.
That's a whole week.
Wow, you must have cried.
I did. I actually did. I did cry yesterday. I did cry this morning, sorry.
And that's what keeps Kathy and Deb driving around. They'll keep calling Nova Scotia Power to lobby for help now because there are families in desperate need. Colleen Jones, CBC News, Truro.
Henry Braun has served as the mayor of Abbotsford for the past 8 years. Before that, another 4 as a councillor. But after more than a decade in public office, he's chosen not to seek re-election. Braun will likely be remembered most as the man who helped steer his community through a disaster. Last November, Abbotsford was flooded, homes submerged, livelihoods destroyed, the main thoroughfare swept away. At the front of it all was Braun, so it may have come as a surprise when he announced that he will not be seeking re-election. And now his time is almost up. Mayor Henry Braun joins me now. Mayor, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for the invite, Anita.
You know, you played such an important role in helping your community deal with the horrific flooding. What has the past year taught you about the importance of leadership at the local level?
Well, that you have to step up whenever there's a disaster of any kind, anything that happens that's really tough on a community, that you need to be, you being the mayor, need to be front and center to intercept all of the stuff that comes from every different angle, not to put staff out there and let them field difficult questions. That's what people expect from leadership, and I think I've tried to emulate that and show an example of what a leader does when you're in big trouble as a city.
Yeah, I think your community would say that you were front and center when that crisis came down and throughout it all. You know, Abbotsford is one of BC's fastest growing cities, and with that, of course, comes unaffordability. We've seen the homeless population out there grow. How do you think you've handled that growth in population in your time in office and also that growth in the vulnerable population?
Well, maybe I'll start with the vulnerable, because when I ran in 2011, I wasn't happy with what was happening on our streets. And I won't go into the details of that. But we had zero supportive housing in 2011. I think we have 150 more or less supportive housing units. And I think there's 3 or maybe even as high as 400 in the pipeline at various stages. So we've made progress. But having said that, there is probably twice as many homeless people today on our streets than there was 10 years ago. And that's sad, because people are falling off or through the cracks. And I've had meetings with Minister Eby that we have to do more. And it's not just in Abbotsford, it's everywhere. The BC Urban Mayors Caucus, of which I'm part of, we've been talking about this weekly for the last 2 years. And we've seen some progress, but we got a long way to go.
Mayor, do you have a moment in your time in office that's really stood out for you, a moment that's humbled you that, you know, you can't get out of your mind?
Yes, and it has to do with the flood. Having watched our farming community come together, neighbor helping neighbor, and sometimes people who didn't even know each other helping them, and then the rest of the community coming behind them and beside them to help them in the darkest hours of their lives. That really humbled me. I have not seen that in my 69 years living here ever. And I will always cherish the many, many conversations that I had with people who were, you know, neck deep in water, helping farmers drag cows out or trying to save their chickens or and so on, and people's lives. That will be with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it was really incredible to watch that from out here, and I had a chance to go out there as well, and that really stuck with me too. You know, I'm from Abbotsford, and it's funny living out here now and hearing what people think about the Fraser Valley. It's all farms, it's all the boonies, and you know, they probably saw some of that footage and thought the same thing. But it is so much more than that. So how do you see Abbotsford playing a role in the region, in this province going forward? You know, why should people care about it?
Well, we've become a big city of 154,000 people. We're not a village anymore, and we influence the surrounding region. We become the hub of the Fraser Valley. You know, we have an international airport, a first-class hospital and cancer center, a university, and so much more. And the services that we provide all around, you know, from Hope to, well, right through to Surrey. We are making a big dent where we never used to. And we're also the 3rd most multicultural or ethnically diverse community in Canada. Toronto is 1, Vancouver is 2nd, and according to Stats Canada, we're 3rd. And I love that about our community. I mean, my wife and I enjoy food. I enjoy food too much, which is why I'm overweight. But we go to different restaurants every Friday night on our date night or when we're not doing something. And just to meet people and hear their stories, where they came from. Many of them are immigrants, hardworking people. Lately, I've been meeting with Ukrainians, refugees who are here. And to hear their stories are very similar to my mother and father who fled the Ukraine during 1943.
Mayor Henry Braun, thank you and good luck on your next adventure.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
An Ontario community reeling over the shooting deaths of 2 police officers. The search for answers is coming up.
Vancouver's hippie newspaper, the Georgia Straight, has lost the first round in its court battle for the right to publish and sell papers on city streets. From the West Coast, CBC News reporter Sheldon Turcotte has the story.
The paper was something of an overnight success. Only 6 issues old, its circulation reached 63,000 and growing fast. But this success led to its troubles. Public and high school students were the main buyers. The city inspector, after consultation with the mayor, suspended its business license. In spite of demonstrations at City Hall, council upheld the action by a vote of 7-3. The editors of the Georgia Straight went to court to seek an injunction setting aside the suspension, but the request was denied, and the judge commended Mayor Tom Campbell for his prompt action, thus preventing the distribution of filth to Vancouver school children. Editor Dan McLeod, a former mathematician, says the Georgia Straight has stopped publication for the time being, but he argues the paper was not obscene. The rallying point for these flower children is the Georgia Straight. They say the paper is far from dead. The Straight plans to appeal to City Council and perhaps go to court again to test the constitutional right of the city to suspend the license. The whole episode, to them, is one more example of how far out of touch the establishment is with youth of today. The paper was a joke on society. Now society is the joke. If the Straight can't be sold openly, it may publish underground. Most people can't or won't understand the hippie movement. And the hippies are prepared to turn their backs on an unsympathetic world.
A community about an hour north of Toronto is feeling the pain tonight. 2 of their police officers are dead after a shooting. And as Ali Chiasson reports, a 23-year-old suspect who is still unnamed by police was also killed.
Police were called to a disturbance just before 8 p.m. last night. Nobody could have expected what happened next.
It is with profound sadness that I announce the death of Constable Devon Northrup and Constable Morgan Russell. Words cannot describe our grief.
Constable Northrup and Russell were shot inside the home they were called to. The 23-year-old suspect was also shot.
As far as timing as to when it occurred, that remains under investigation. There was an exchange of gunfire between two officers and the man, and that man was pronounced deceased at the scene.
Neighbors heard about a dozen gunshots.
I thought maybe it was fireworks. So I went outside and quickly ran over to the house, and it was pandemonium over there.
The Special Investigations Unit is probing what exactly happened inside the home. They aren't naming the suspect at this time. A woman who says she was friends with him arrived at the scene today.
Never expected this to happen.
She says she's thinking about his grandparents, whom neighbors say he lived with, and how they might be coping with what happened.
But they were really nice people, always there for him, everything like that.
We are a long ways away from getting answers. The biggest question remains, why?
At this time, it's very preliminary. Forensic investigators are at the scene currently trying to determine how many gunshots and that type of thing. It would be too early to comment.
The suspect vehicle has been towed away while the SIU investigates how the suspect died. York Regional Police are conducting a separate investigation into the police shooting. Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Innisfil.
New Russian missile attacks have caused another power outage at a Ukrainian nuclear plant. As Briar Stewart reports, it's also raised new worries about safety around the site, now under Russian control.
For the second time in 5 days, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe had its main source of power cut and needed to rely on backup generators. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, who was just in Russia Tuesday meeting with President Vladimir Putin, said this repeated loss of Zaporizhia's off-site power is a deeply worrying development, and it underlines the urgent need for a nuclear safety and security protection zone around the site. The plant is right along the front line in the community of Enerhodar, now under Russian control. Both of these men live in that city and asked us not to show their faces. They're now in Zaporizhia recovering side by side. We met them just a few days ago after they got injured in a missile attack. They were at this checkpoint trying to cross back into occupied territory when it was slammed by 3 missiles. At least 30 were killed and dozens were injured as a blast tore through a line of vehicles and a nearby market. I was standing 40 meters away. I saw people fall down and scream and everything else. Despite the horror and the danger, the men want to return to Enerhodar as soon as they can to be with their families. There are bombings every day without a pause, day and night bombings. There's absolutely no way out. This is the kind of fear we live in.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
Putin has called the nuclear power plant a concern, but had stronger words for the damage to Russia's Nord Stream pipelines. Swedish investigators suggested they were sabotaged last month, and Putin blames terrorists. The logic is cynical, he said, to destroy and block sources of cheap energy. Russia blames Ukraine for the explosion that rocked its prize bridge to Crimea over the weekend. Security services say they've detained 8 people, among them Russians, Ukrainians, and an Armenian, for being involved with the truck, which Russia says was full of explosives. Tomorrow, Putin will meet with Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's expected to propose peace talks. But given that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he will not negotiate with Putin, doesn't look very promising. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Dnipro.
Canada is spending $47 million in new military aid to Ukraine. That includes specialized ammunition as well as warm clothing for Ukrainian soldiers as winter approaches. But as Marina von Stackelberg reports, the federal government may be close to exhausting its ability to help.
Russia continues to pummel Ukraine with a series of air attacks. Dozens of cruise missiles and drones have hit critical infrastructure. NATO and Ukrainian defense officials met in Brussels to discuss how they can ramp up support. Canada announcing it will send more supplies in the coming weeks.
We know that winter is coming. Canada has a particular expertise in winter clothing and combat in this area.
The new support includes much-needed ammunition for howitzer guns. Canada will also give Ukraine high-tech cameras to use in their drones. 500,000 pieces of winter gear are also being sent.
Hats, gloves, boots, parkas, the items that Ukrainian soldiers need on the front lines will be purchased by the Government of Canada, primarily from Canadian suppliers.
But Ukraine says what it also needs from Canada are more guns and military vehicles. Canada has promised 39 brand new armored vehicles, but only a handful are in the process of being delivered. They are part of $500 million set aside in the federal spring budget to help Ukraine, money that's been exhausted.
We're pretty much at the point now where there's not much that's left on the proverbial shelf that we can go and donate without it having significant consequences for our own armed forces, because we'd effectively be taking away equipment, ammunition, supplies that they need to send overseas.
Something Canada doesn't have in its own arsenal to offer Ukraine is more air defense. NATO's chief says recent attacks on Ukrainian civilians show that's a top priority.
Over the last weeks, we have seen the most serious escalation of the war since the invasion in February.
NATO says allies are working to replenish their stocks of ammunition and weapons and step up production on more. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
An Ottawa father of a child with Down syndrome is questioning the actions of police and the local school board after his son was nearly charged with sexual assault. As Natalia Goodwin reports, the father says the teen did not have the ability to understand what he was doing.
Picture. Nice pictures. Nice pictures, yeah, absolutely.
This is how Matthew spent most of the school year of 2021, learning from home. He has Down syndrome and operates at the level of a 5-year-old. He had been attending Hillcrest High School for a few years, but after an incident that began last fall, he was pulled from school.
It's devastating for people that have a child with a disability.
It began in November when Wes received a phone call from the school principal. Matt was being accused of sexual assault by his educational assistant. Matthew's daily report said he had grabbed the assistant's buttocks 7 times. The family had been working on similar behavior at home, but the accusation was still shocking. The police soon got in touch, and a week later, they were ready to charge Matthew.
They don't know who Matthew is, never came to see Matthew if he even has that ability to do something like that.
Wes got a lawyer. Then a few months later, police and the school began to work together to get Matt back to class. The family was given a choice: send Matthew to a specialized school or agree to a safety protocol involving a padded stick to keep Matthew away from staff.
The sad part was it wasn't just his decision, it was a group of people and not one person stood up and said, hey, this is wrong.
The Ottawa Police Service couldn't comment on the specifics of this case, but it did say that it takes all complaints seriously and investigates them fully. And if evidence supports it, charges are laid. But some in the law community, though, say that they doubt that this case would have ever made it to court because it would have had to be proven that Matthew had the intention to commit the act.
I don't think that if I'm the police officer, I'm using my discretion to lay this charge, given what you then learn about Down syndrome and this particular person's functioning.
Those who work with people with Down syndrome say there are ways to deal with this kind of behavior that involves patient and constant reminders at school and at home.
How can we best move forward together to make this a teachable moment for everybody, understanding that there are absolute boundaries in touch.
The school board could also not comment on this specific case, but in a statement, the OCDSB said in some cases a safety plan is developed and implemented. If warranted, protective equipment could also be used, though they did not mention a stick. Matthew is now in a new school and thriving, but Wes wants better for children like his son.
I just want them to be recognized as just a human being, not somebody that we can do whatever we want to and get away with it.
Natalia Goodwin, CBC News, Ottawa.
Ignoring threats of a crackdown, protests in Iran continue to percolate. The role of the arts in the widespread movement. That's next.
Oh, where is it? Oh, it's gotta be here somewhere. Oh!
Up, 2, 3, 4, and high knees, march it out, even higher knees.
Mr. Orlando, have you seen my favorite dance T-shirt? I can't find it anywhere.
No, Janae, haven't seen it. Well, back to my marching. Up, 2, 3, 4.
Mr. Orlando, could you actually help me? I have to go soon, and I can't find it.
I'm sorry, Janae, I can't stop marching. It's marching time.
Okay, well, I guess I'll just go and check the kitchen. Again.
Excellent idea, Janae. Leaves more marching room for me. Now get those knees up, Orlando. Oh, wait, who are you?
The Knights of Kindness. We are the Knights of Kindness. Huzzah! Kind are we. We always mind our P's and Q's from sea to shiny sea. Manners matter. Oh, hallowed day, horned brown one. I am Sir Thanks-a-Lot, and on my right is my right hand. And Sir Thanks very much.
Now, let's get to the matter at hand.
I see.
Explain yourself.
Explain what? I didn't do anything.
Exactly.
You did not helpeth your friend findeth the object of her most greatest desire.
And doth thou not careth about thine friend?
Doth I whatest? I'm sorry, my ye olde English isn't strong.
Oh, that makes sense. Do you care about your friend Janae?
Oh, well, of course I do. I love Janae so much. I love her this much. More even, but I have short arms.
Well, dost thou think that taking a moment to help her might have shown how much you love her?
Oh, well, yes. It would have been more kind to help her look for her shirt, I guess.
Helping others is kind and shows them how much you care.
Oh, well, then I should start showing Janae how much I care by looking for her shirt.
Magnificently put, my well-dressed cow.
It's a moose, actually. It's a common mistake. But not to worry, Knights of... What? Kindness? Where do they go? So many things to look for today. Okay, now, if I were a T-shirt, where would I be? Aha! I've got you now, T-shirt.
Just let me say T-shirt! Mr. Orlando, you found my T-shirt. Oh, thank you so much for helping me look.
Oh, well, happy to help, Janae, anytime.
Okay. Time for dance class. Let's go, T-shirt.
Enjoy! And now back to my marching.
More protests in Iran, despite an increasingly deadly crackdown by security forces. Today, Iran's supreme leader dismissed the anti-government protests as riots planned by the enemy. But demonstrations in support of Mahsa Amini are still happening in the capital and other cities. These images from Iran Wire show protesters gathering on the streets of Tehran. Now, Iranian artists around the world have taken on a special role in supporting the resistance against the Iranian regime. Ellen Morrow shows us how art is being used to help give protesters a global voice.
The art of a movement. Inspired by brave protesters on the streets of Iran being held up around the world. Mahsa Amini immortalized, her arrest by Iran's so-called morality police over her headscarf, her death in their custody, fueling artists, their work echoing and amplifying Iranians' cries for women, life, freedom. Take a look at this poster in Mexico City. Say her name, it says. The image designed by Iranian-Canadian artist Hajar Moradi.
So this is some of the art that we've been seeing.
Yes. We caught up with Hajar at her studio in Toronto.
When you were creating this, tell me how you were feeling.
I felt anger, and I wanted to convey that Iranian women are angry and fed up.
Anger has surged across Iran for weeks. Protesters demanding bodily autonomy for women and end to the country's hardline regime. Some videos are getting out, but government internet blocks make it hard to see the true scale of this push for freedom and the push back against it. Cue Iranian artists in the diaspora and others supporting this movement. Powerful images like these flooding social media. Hashtag Mahsa Amini posted, shared, and reshared tens of millions of times all around the world.
The whole purpose of this is to amplify Iranian people's voice.
Hajar's art helps her cope with fears for loved ones still in Iran.
When you learned of Mahsa's death, how did that impact you and your work?
Of course, there's an anger, there's a huge anger in every Iranian woman because of decades of suppression. What we want to do and what we are trying to do is to put our anger into work.
Art and action. This is Hajar and a group of friends cutting their hair at a Toronto demonstration. An act of resistance symbolizing control over one's body, featured in so much of the artwork, including Hajar's most recent piece. There with her at the Toronto protest was fellow Iranian artist Samin Karamati. In her Toronto studio, Samin is working on a sculpture that will be covered with hair, dedicated to Mahsa and the Iranian women who've been fighting repression for decades. Much of the hair has come from protests around the world over the last few weeks.
What is the significance of incorporating so much hair in this installation? What does it say?
I don't know how else can I say that this is my own body. And I want, this is my body, just go away.
Samin was also arrested by the so-called morality police before she left Iran in 2012.
When you see what's going on now, how are you feeling in this moment?
I'm learning from this young generation of girls. They are very brave. I'm just looking at them, learning from them, and try to be their voices.
And they're not backing down.
They are not. It seems that they are not going back. How long will it take? I don't know, but women of Iran, they win. They are the winners.
Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Toronto.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaff is here now. And Joe, I know it's almost like you're just trying to bring the fall with that jacket.
Thank you for noticing my maple leaves. Yes, Anita, we don't have them on the ground right now, so I'm channeling fall in any way I can because it certainly doesn't feel like out there. I know we're starting to see the leaves change, although it's more brown than anything. And it is crisp in the morning, but it's certainly not the fall that we're getting across other parts of the country. Beautiful fall colors in place across eastern Canada right now. 16 in Ottawa and Montreal and 9 out towards Halifax tonight. We're feeling some of the heat in... I was feeling the heat as well. Feeling some of that heat in Edmonton and Calgary. So Alberta kind of under that same umbrella as us, but BC definitely taking the cake for hottest and driest few past few months. Current temperatures right now across the south, 17 in through Lytton, 16 out towards Kelowna, and 13 right now through YVR. So once that sun drops, we really do lose those temperatures quickly. Okay, high pressure sticking around. This is where I cannot find the rain. We are seeing it tonight in through Haida Gwaii, and tomorrow morning you'll be looking at 50 kilometre per hour gusts in through places like Prince Rupert, taking you right through to Monday. And notice we start to see some showers sneak their way down the coast. Early next week is when a cold front does move through, so rather than the 25-degree temperatures we'll experience in Metro Vancouver, coming down to high teens. Still well above our seasonal of 14 for this time of the year, based on our last 20-year average anyway. And we're a decade behind. Speaking of averages, we still have to get our last 10-year data in. So the averages, when I say 14 degrees, that's just the 2000 to 2010 averages. Look at those numbers, though. I mean, that is pretty incredible. I cannot believe this is an October forecast, Anita. I'll let you know as soon as I see the rain. Not yet.
We'll be waiting for it, Joe. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a big winner, but the Fat Bear crown didn't come without some controversy. The uproar in Alaska. That's next.
We all know that wind can be used to make electricity, but how can wind be used to make hydrogen? A huge energy project is planned in Stephenville, a first of its kind in Canada, with 164 wind turbines. But electricity from wind isn't the goal. The goal is green hydrogen. Well, technically green ammonia, but we'll get to that. Let's start with hydrogen. Most abundant element in the universe, number 1 on the periodic table. You can find hydrogen in places like the sun, or closer to home, it's the H in H2O.
So this is water molecule. So we have 1 oxygen atom and 2 hydrogen atoms. So together this makes H2O. And what we want to do is to separate these bonds into oxygen and hydrogen. My name is Kevin Pope. I am an associate professor here at Memorial University. My specializations are renewable energy, particularly wind energy and hydrogen production.
The plan in Stephenville is to use wind energy to power a process called water electrolysis. So water electrolysis uses hydrogen like a battery to store electricity. But the key to the Stephenville project is that the electricity being stored would come from a green, renewable source, wind. That's what makes it green hydrogen. But there's one more step. Remember, the goal isn't actually hydrogen, it's ammonia. So why do they want ammonia instead of hydrogen? And what is ammonia?
Ammonia is a simple gas. It has a nitrogen atom with 3 hydrogen atoms attached to it. One of the shortcomings of hydrogen is that it's actually quite difficult to store. It's very light and it takes up a lot of space. So trying to store that and ship that over across the ocean is not an easy process. So it's a great option to convert it to another molecule, which is easier to transport.
Just as the wind energy would be stored in hydrogen, the hydrogen would be stored in ammonia. Simple enough, but to make it all happen, you need lots of wind, lots of water, and a way to transport the finished product. You can't find that combination of things just anywhere, but you can find them right here. So that's how wind from Newfoundland and Labrador could become power for other parts of the world. A little chemistry goes a long way.
Housing, safety, transportation, and climate change. What do the next 4 years look like? Who will win, and what will it mean for you and your family? Tune in to CBC News for in-depth analysis and context. Join me this Saturday as CBC News presents BC Votes, live commercial-free coverage of the municipal election starting at 7 p.m. Until then, get up to speed at cbc.ca/BCVotes. It's a big competition that combines nature and humor. The winner of Alaska's Fat Bear Week has been crowned, but this year's contest has been marred by a voting scandal. Bear 747 emerged triumphant after officials counted online votes, only after tossing out more than 400 ballots. At first, a different bear, Holly, was named our northern neighbor's most corpulent predator. But staff with Katmai National Park, those are the organizers of the internet poll, well, they found Holly supporters gamed the system to put their tubby teddy over the top. Fat Bear Week, first launched in 2014. Park rangers selected 12 bears each year and show off their weight that they've gained for hibernation. Grizzlies can increase their mass by up to 50% before their long winter's nap. Well, congrats to Bear 747. Controversy and all? Well, there's always next year, Holly. That's it for CBC Vancouver News tonight. Thank you for watching.